took me 10 drafts to write Crownfall, and I'm going to tell you how I did it. From the first outline to the final polish, 10 drafts, 5 phases, and the lessons that shaped the journey. Hello folks, I'm Michael Vadney, author of Crownfall, a noble dark adventure, and today I'm going to tell you about the 10 drafts that I took to write this story. I broke them down into 5 phases and the lessons that I learned through each of them. Let's get into it. The first phase was the foundation, and this only covers the first draft because for anybody who has done this or even attempted to write a book, you know that the first draft is one of the biggest hurdles to tackle. For me, this was done after I had outlined Crownfall. I used the 3-act story structure, and I did it 3 times for each of my main characters. Amara got one, Kindell got one, Jellert got one. It was a mess. I definitely shouldn't have done it this way, and I don't really recommend people do it this way either, because it does create for a repetitive plot when you have one character do their inciting incident, and then another character does their inciting incident, and then the third one does their inciting incident, and you could see how this could get repetitive over the span of a book that ended up being 122,000 words. Luckily, I learned my lessons and fixed it in later drafts. But what was important about this draft is that I made it exist, because you can't fix a book, you can't improve on the plot or the characters or the cliches that I threw in until it exists. I want to give a huge shout out to Writers Anonymous. They are a writing group based out of Dallas, Texas, that really helped me get through this phase and multiple other drafts of Crownfall. Not everybody is ready to have feedback on their initial first draft, but for me, it was invaluable for getting that feedback for, hey, do I know what I'm doing? Can I make this work? Is this story interesting? And I got a lot of feedback really quickly, and it also created a demand on my work, which was very motivating and absolutely crucial for keeping myself nose to the grindstone to make sure that I finish the first draft. I'm not going to say finishing the first draft is the hardest part of this entire process, but it is the first big mountain. And if you can get past that first draft, your chances of success jump exponentially. My second phase is the restructure. This covered drafts 2 and 3, and it was a doozy. After I finished draft 1, I realized that my story was riddled with problems. Plot holes, inconsistencies, emotional moments that didn't quite land the way that I wanted them to. So in order to fix that, I re-outlined the entire book and cataloged all the major story-wide problems from draft 1. I made a big old list of them, and I gotta say, that list was intimidating. But once I had that list, I could tackle each problem one by one. I would pick the ones that had the biggest overarching effect on the story, the things that would change major motions, and tried to figure out what the solution would be to them. Once I brainstormed, bounced ideas off of my editor/wife, and came up with a solution that I was satisfied with, I would go underneath that problem and write down its solution. For instance, one of the biggest issues, like I was talking about in draft 1, in phase 1, was the 3 outlines that I had for my 3 main characters. I took all 3 of those and condensed them into a single cohesive narrative and wrote down everything that would affect. Going through this process allowed me to identify that I had a critical gap in the story. All of my characters had critical plot roles, but lacked defining personalities and preferences, which led to really heavy revision. But after I found solutions for all of that major list of problems, I went through and I did drafts 2 and 3, mainly just trying to implement all those solutions, seeing how some solutions conflicted with another and trying to rectify all of those so that I could bring it all together into a cohesive plot that was enjoyable to read and frustrating to figure out, but made the story better as a result. Phase 3, which covers drafts 3 and 4, was all about getting outside eyes. Like I said in the first draft, first phase, I worked with a writing group, Writers Anonymous, and I did that for the first 3 drafts of Crownfall, and their feedback was invaluable for a lot of reasons. But now at this point, I needed fresh eyes, people who hadn't seen the journey of what I was going for in the story. I needed fresh people to look at these characters, people who they have never met, and try to figure out what impression the story was making on them. So I gathered a group of trusted authors and critical readers and handed them a copy of the manuscript. I gotta say, this was a very exciting time for me. I had worked with a lot of people through Writers Anonymous. People have read the story, but these were other people who had published books for the most part and were in the game. It felt very validating, truth be told, to have authors reading my story and giving me feedback and telling me like, hey, this is good, lean into this, or this could use a little work and maybe you should put a little more effort into this so that there's less confusion here. From each beta reader, I gathered up all the feedback and tried to decide what was working and what wasn't working so that I knew which knives to sharpen and which edges to blunt, in both character and plot. And then I did something that I don't think a lot of people really talk about, is that I filtered this feedback. Not everything that was given back to me was useful. And this is going to be because readers want different things from stories than what you, the author, intend. Much of what they said was incredibly spot on and gave me a lot of insights into the story that I had created. But some of the feedback was also just trying to turn the story into something that I wasn't intending. And trying to discern the difference between those things is something you should take a lot of time, a little bit of soul searching, and figure out where do you want this story to go, what kind of story do you want to tell, and most importantly, what kind of effect do you want to have on your readers? The 4th phase, which covered the 5th draft, was the repair. This is very similar to what I did after draft 1, where I got all of the beta readback, which told me the problems in the story that I hadn't fixed or hadn't foreseen just yet. I made another list, and through that list, I went through and tried to solve the problems. These problems were different. They were less overarching big mountains and more trying to figure out how all the different pieces of the jigsaw would fit together to make this plot work, to make these characters work, and to make their progression through each other work. At this phase, I do suggest you prioritize the problems that are going to have the greatest changes, the things that are going to move chapters around or change what characters do in general. Because these are going to be the things that have the most effect on the most words within your story. There is no point in fixing a kitchen scene if you are going to later completely throw out that kitchen scene because that arc just didn't make sense. So start with the big problems and then narrow down to the smaller, tighter ones. And again, just like working on drafts 2 or 3, once I had my list of solutions, I started implementing them, starting with the biggest and working my way down. It was this draft that I really plugged up all of the plot holes and really strengthened the character motivations in the story. The 5th phase, which covered drafts 6 to 10, was the polish. And I gotta say, this was probably the hardest one for me, the most grueling drag off. For these 5 chapters, I worked very closely with my editor. And though this was the most difficult stage, it was also the most impactful. It's what took my story from being, this is a good indie story, to this is a polished, quality novel. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that compliment coming from people who have read Crownfall. In their reviews, they constantly point out that this is a polished novel. And it happened in stage 5. This is where all of the prose got tightened up and all of the emotional moments got sharpened to cut the deepest. Character choices were realigned until they matched with who the characters truly were and what their goals were, all to align with the story's themes. One of the things that I did do in this phase that I should have done all the way back in draft 1 was create a timeline. Once the timeline was created, it was so much easier to figure out where chapters and sequence of events should go. It's something that I really wish I would have done in draft 1, but I don't think I did until draft 7? It was rough. But this stage is what took Crownfall from a good indie book to a polished novel. And I couldn't be happier with it. All right, folks, that is it. Those are the 10 drafts of Crownfall, how I came to create this noble dark adventure. I hope this was super helpful for you. Just a little bit of insight into what it was like to actually pump out draft after draft for this. And do not be intimidated or think that you have to do 10 drafts. 10 drafts is what I did as a first-time author. I'm hoping that in future novels, I'll be able to tighten that up a lot more. And I definitely think I can, because so much about writing you learn simply by doing it. So don't worry about trying to make it good, trying to make it great, trying to even make it make sense. At first, just try to make it exist. And then you can keep working on it as long as you need to. Get help when you need to, get feedback when you need to. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. You got this. Until next time, folks, let's be author adjacent together. See ya.